Joined by McClusky. Since we've been talking about the virus, I just wondered, I mean, you've got quite a lot of members working, for example, in schools at the moment. What kind of feedback are you getting from them about their anxiety about the shortage of tests and what's happening in terms of the potential closure of schools?
Well, there's anxiety right throughout the nation about the shortage of testing, and frankly, the government's approach to this has been somewhat shambolic. We've taken the view that all workers have a statutory right to be in a safe workplace. And so, of course, we've been encouraging the government to do a whole host of things for some weeks now, including personal protective equipment, which you'll recall at some juncture early in this crisis, there wasn't sufficient numbers of it. And so we need basically for the government to get hold of the whole basis of testing and tracking. Let me give you a startling piece of news that I found out just the other day. There is a company in Derbyshire who make 1 million tests every single week. Tests that give a pretty accurate response, not 100%, within 15 to 30 minutes. And yet the government hasn't put forward a single order to them, though all of their work is exported to Germany, France and the rest of Europe. And it seems to me that the government are lost in the context of how to deal with these matters. We find out today the government suggesting that parents should be the only ones that pick children up from school. That will have a devastating impact for working parents and the whole issue of trying to get some normality back into our economy. So I'm afraid the manner in which the government have dealt with it leaves a lot to be desired. We've just gone through a summer period and there isn't a single testing centre in airports. That just seems crazy to me. So I'm disappointed. There's a lot of anxiety. This is about confidence, getting workers feeling confident. It's why some months ago I offered both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor the usage of the army of health and safety reps that my union's got 10,000, much wider in the rest of trade unions. Use them. These are experts that can give confidence to workers to get back to work.
And what was the response when you offered that?
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't picked up. The response hasn't been forthcoming.
So much more to talk to Len about. Welcome back. I'm delighted that Len McClusky, General Secretary of Unite, is still with me. One of the things I really want to talk to you about was what's happening, obviously, the bad things that are happening to the economy. Actually, it's tonight, which is sort of the deadline for companies to decide whether they're going to lay people off with, furlough ending at the end of October. If you want to get rid of more than 100 people, you've got to start the consultation from tomorrow morning. It's a deeply nerve-wracking time for lots of workers. I suppose the question that I want to put to you, first of all, about this is there are some changes that have been prompted by COVID which look to me to be permanent changes. You think the government should be doing more to support jobs, but what if those jobs aren't any longer real jobs? Well,
first of all, you're right, Robert. The clock is ticking. 45 days consultation. 8 million workers are currently on the job retention scheme. That's 32% of our working population. And the edge of the cliff is 45 days away unless the government do something. We're imploring the government.
What do you want them to do?
I want them to be imaginative. You talk about so-called jobs that I've heard the terminology zombie jobs by the companies, terrible phrase indeed, companies that are not going to be able to come through the crisis and still be there. That's why we're saying to the government we need imaginative and targeted approaches.
So they are doing
including the likes of
like the Kickstart scheme.
Including in particular the likes of short-time working, turning one job into two, 50%, and also then initiatives like not charging tax to those individuals who are only on 50% work and 50% pay. In that way, it would increase to 75, 80% of their gross earnings.
I mean, I think everybody would be...
Robert, let me make this point. We're saying to the government that they need to be much more proactive. In all our competitive countries, we've got France, Germany, Spain, Holland, Belgium, the Scandinavian countries. They've all extended their job retention schemes, because here's the point. It was interesting you talking to our last guest, the scientist, about vaccines. This is to get us through this crisis so that at the end of it, we have a robust economy that is able to compete. That's what will happen in Germany. There'll be no wastelands there. There'll be no wastelands in France. But we are teetering on the edge of wasteland UK economy if we don't take action. The company have introduced things like loans, the Bank of England loan scheme, which had that many criteria on it that major companies couldn't get past the credit market.
Although in the end they introduced a scheme for smaller companies where there were absolutely no criteria and the take-up was enormous.
But the reality is that the second scheme they introduced, Project Birch, very, very few companies, in fact, to my knowledge, only one. So what we're saying to the government, it's not too late, but the clock is ticking. Please make certain that you engage with trade unions and we do something to protect our workers in this country. Do you know, tonight there will be millions of workers, Robert, worried.
No, I'm aware, and it's terrible.
But that isn't the case, Robert, for German workers and French workers. Now, how can that be? Here we have British workers, once again, being treated in a second-class way, and our government has to step in to assist us. Otherwise, we'll come out of this crisis and we won't be fit to have a robust economy that can compete with our major competitors.
Look, obviously, given the performance of the German economy over the last few years, it's very hard to be critical of the way they run things, but there is a credible argument that Europe, if it ends up simply supporting every job that currently exists, will end up with a number of, I don't want to use the word zombie companies, but lamed up companies, and they will end up less prosperous as nations than they would other.
The alternative is to have British companies, British workers losing skills, losing experience, and not being able to deal with a worldwide economy when we come out of crisis. That's why the government have got to act. It cannot allow this situation where literally hundreds of thousands of jobs, maybe millions. This Prime Minister is in danger of presiding over record high unemployment and record poverty.
I want to bring in Gavin on this because, you know, as important as keeping us healthy is this whole issue of how we manage the economy through this most difficult of times. And a very difficult judgment is going to have to be made by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, which is which companies and which jobs to support.
So I agree with Len that the government is going to have to take additional action. If it were me advising him, if I was doing my old job, I wouldn't extend the furlough scheme. I would look at some more specific help for the sectors that either can't trade or are particularly affected. But I want to give you an example.
Airlines are not going to recover for 4 to 5 years. Everybody agrees. So how much support...
That's not true.
But aerospace, I think, is a crucial sector for our economy. But I just want to make one other point, because we have rightly criticised the government tonight on testing. But I think on jobs, it is important to say the UK so far has seen one of the smallest increases of unemployment of any major economy. And the furlough scheme was a really innovative innovation, and HMRC and the government... I've just said we should give credit for what has happened so far.
When the Chancellor introduced the scheme, I was one of the first to say that it was courageous and bold. And the danger now is that the gains that he did with that courageous move will be lost.
Well, I agree with you.
Unless they do something else.
But I think it is important, when we criticise the government when we don't think they've got things right, on the early economic response, that's one of the best things about our response to this crisis. So
but the furlough was right. It was absolutely right. But we are at a precipice now, and it's really dangerous, especially at a time when the virus is going up. They could do all sorts of things. Part-time furloughs, you could combine it with training, have some job guarantees for young people.